good to revitalize some of these great things Helwig has done in the past years, and he will talk about today as well in his presentation. So the talk is entitled From One to Many in Visualization. I would like to emphasize that 2 is written with just a single O here and not with a double O. So we will hear how we went from 1 to many and does it in his visualization work as well. And everything started with one diploma he actually got at the TU Vienna in 1995. And then it went to many papers with many citations. So Helwig is one of the most cited scientists in our community with more than 8,000 citations actually. And so what I try to do is I try to get an overview, okay, what is this guy doing to get so many citations, right? So I looked at his top 25 cited papers, which all have more than 100 citations actually. And I try to figure out, okay, so what are the main topics? And when you start to do this, you very quickly realize this Helwig has done almost everything. Yeah? So I decided I just start with some topics I personally found very valuable in my own research. And this started with a 2-level volume rendering, a paper I guess most of you know. This was actually one of the first papers of Helwig I really deeply read and really implemented back then. But he also made very valuable contributions in flow visualizations. Many of you will know his work in that area as well. And in fact, this is the area where he also made his PhD thesis in 1998, yeah, still at TU Vienna. But from there, he then went into another direction again, and he was actually developing a lot of basic algorithms and concepts which are used today in many visual analytics systems. And that was before the whole visual analytics field was actually started, which was in 2005, right? And Helwig finished his habilitation in 2003, where he, for instance, were doing a lot of contributions for focus and context techniques there. Yeah? So we saw a lot of foundational work for what we consider today as the research field of visual analytics. But from there, he also went into augmented reality, parallel coordinates, just to name a few. So very broad. So this is his scientific impact he had. Yeah? Very diverse, highly cited, great work. But he managed to show that this stuff also matters really in real-world applications. And he was a co-founder, in fact, of the EuroVis Research Center in Vienna in 2000, where many of the techniques were built based on industry corporations. And so you could really see that there was a clear real-world value of this great scientific work Helwig was doing. And I just asked him which one is the project you are most proud of at EuroVis, and he said it's a cooperation with ABM. So it's a car manufacturing company. Many of you might have seen these papers about flow visualization and exploration in engines. Brushing and linking was in there. I guess the Symbols framework came out of that one as well. So this is what Helwig did at EuroVis. And in 2003, he actually took over as a scientific director of EuroVis, and then was coordinating all the research groups in there. And he did that until 2007, when he actually moved to the University of Bergen, where he still is now. So it's 10 years, he has a 10-year anniversary at the University of Bergen. And in this 10 years, he really built up a highly visible visualization group, not just with the scientific output they have, but also community services. In 2007, there was EuroVis, which was a very nice event organized by Helwig. There was EuroVis in 2011 in Bergen. Many of you might remember the great t-shirt we got back then with all the visualization people on there. And then just recently we had VCBM in 2016, also in Bergen, which was also a very nice event. So I'm not going to talk about all the awards and paper sharing and everything you have done, Helwig, but I want to talk about your Christmas cards. So I guess many of you received these great Christmas cards. If you do not receive the Christmas cards from Bergen, send Helwig an email. I'm sure you can get on the list that you will have fun every year before Christmas. So with that, we are about to finish, and I will like to give the word over to Helwig, avid hiker, biker, and scientist. Thank you very much.
end, what a nice meeting of people here in Barcelona. I was looking forward to it for a long time, and now we are already at the end of this conference with lots of new ideas and solutions and great interactions and also additional program. I mean, most of us have enjoyed the visit to Sagrada Familia, and for me it was a very special event as well, because I was here 15 years ago and it was so different. I mean, the inside was blocked with construction everywhere, and now it's all the space and the light and the colors. This was clearly very, very impressive. But let me take you on a little journey in this talk. In a way, you may see this as an experimental approach to giving a capstone at EuroVis, but hopefully in the end, at least some of you will be inspired. And the journey starts in Norway, where we also have interesting light and sites, both on the light side and on the dark side, depending on which time of the year. And as Timo mentioned, we had a little welcome event in 2007 when I started my professorship at the University of Bergen, which we called EuroVis 07, and I mean, you probably can't read the program, but we had a list of very nice speakers there. Chuck was opening the conference, and then we had several highly interesting invited speakers. And at the end, we finally had a panel discussion about the future of visualization. And this is not the only such discussion. Maybe natural to pick this topic up at a visualization event. And I remember this very vividly, because since it was a very friendly and almost intimate setting with a bunch of people, not too many, we really could get this discussion going in a very interesting way. And it was not difficult to find out that talking about solutions in visualization is in fact a touchy topic. So, and it has this kind of two-sided aspect to it. On the one hand, if we read our papers, in every paper we are praising our solutions. I mean, we are solving the big problems in every paper, right? But if somebody comes to us and asks us, so what problems did you actually solve in all these 25 years of excellent visualization research with thousands of citations and so many papers, then we are getting a little quiet. And if people offer some suggestions, I mean, is it maybe direct volume rendering or is it tree visualization, then we, of course, we shy back and say, I mean, we've done a lot of work, yes, but solved. I want to pick up one example here in the very nice SIGGRAPH 2002 paper, image-based flow visualization of one of our big heroes in the field, Jack. If you read the conclusions, you come to this very interesting sentence. So, as there remains little to be desired, we think that we are close to having solved the problem of visualization of two-dimensional flow. I mean, this is remarkable. We read conclusions, of course, in every paper, but not those kinds of. And when this was published, I recall that there was an outcry by a couple of our colleagues. No, how can you ever say that? I mean, I've solved this. We have so much more to do in this important topic. So this brings us, and you know, in the end, you can kind of get out of this embarrassing moment by hands, and when, if at all, the problem is ever solved, at least optimally, and then maybe this is a Solomonic resolution, and we can go home and everything is fine. This is a nice fresco in one of the churches in Austria showing this Solomonic judgment. I'm not sure we really want that. But in fact, we can look a little more at this question of when is something solved, and for me an interesting consideration here is the Pareto principle, as it is often referred to. It goes back to Wilfredo Pareto, who was living in the 19th and 20th century, and he made the observation that back then, like about 80% of the land in Italy was owned by about 20% of the people. And he thought about this, and he came up with a probability density distribution that you can can see 3 versions or 4 versions actually on the right there. And if you do the cumulative function of that, then you see this famous curve that we are now seeing in many aspects, in many respects. People are often referring to it. And like maybe the most famous point here is this 2080 point, and it's very often referred to, say, in management, where people say like 20% of the effort you can get to 80% of the result, and this should make you think about where to invest your efforts. Right? So, in that respect, we of course quickly understand that optimization, going to the ultimate solution of a problem, is a lot of work. Right? You invest 1 delta effort and you get to 80%, but then you can go on and on and on, and it never stops. You get close to 100% quite soon actually, but you never really get there. So that can let us think maybe it's a better approach to be satisfied with sufficient solutions instead of optimal solutions. And that is one thing that I've learned when working with practitioners like at EuroVis, as Timo mentioned, that in collaboration with practitioners, sufficient solutions, they are very popular. I mean, because once you've solved them, you can move on to your next problem. You can invest your efforts there. And one can argue that if you follow this strategy, by just summing up the percentages, you eventually get to more in shorter time. But eventually, you know, it is a trade to make, and luckily we need it all, and that provides something for everyone, also in research, and that leads, for example, to these different types of research that we all know, from high risk, high gain research, like in the very popular ERC grants or transformative research or the like, over basic research that is usually fully funded, to applied research and maybe optimization and eventually engineering. I want to really emphasize that all of these types of research are very important and we need them, and it's good that people do work on all of those. And I want to maybe especially emphasize that this applied research is something that we really need and which is very important, and I like it very much myself, and we have had some discussions in our fields whether or not we appreciate applied research enough, and this should be one message here from my side, that this is really very important. Maybe you like this quote as I do: in theory there is no difference between theory and practice, in practice there is. So it's attributed to different people, but I think it's a very smart sentence after all. So, are we done now in terms of a Solomonic judgment? Well, maybe we can still take it one step further here and look at how do these compare to each other. Because, after all, doing research on the top of this list is very attractive. If you manage to get an ERC grant in Europe or a comparable grant somewhere else, this is really appreciated, and at my university they want us to go for these grants, and they are counting them in their reports. So it is in fact very attractive. And it may relate to another management strategy, which is finally called Moscow technique, where you try to differentiate, for example, must-have from nice-to-have. It's a very interesting and useful thought concept, and it's mentioned there that it's more likely to get a good return of investment if you are investing on the must-haves and not so much on the nice-to-haves, maybe. And in business, that would be then maybe money that you win back, but in science, this could be the exact papers. So, yeah, but then we see that, does this mean everyone should go into high-risk, high-gain research? And that is not likely and not maybe a good way to think about this anyway. And this brings me to another parallel here by Rogers, who published a book some 50 years ago, The Future of Innovations, where he described like the density function of where people are in the process of innovation. And by now this is also very much cited, and it's very clear that you only have a few pioneers. I mean, not everyone can sail over the Atlantic and explore America as nobody did before. So the number of pioneers usually are small, and then as you go to the early adopters or to the late adopters, you find many more people there, and this is quite normal, and this is the same in research. Eventually, we can see that what type of research you do will also depend on where a field is or where a subfield is that you want to work on. And that, in my opinion, is interestingly discussed by Gartner, and they are, every year they are publishing what they're calling their hype cycle visualization, where they are putting new technologies on and they are trying to tell us where they are. And this curve seems to repeat over and over again for all sorts of innovations and maybe also research. And very often we see this kind of typical development that in the beginning it's a hard time of pioneering, nobody knows about it, and things are working in the dark and it's very unclear, and then there may come this peak of inflated expectations, or you can see this as the hype point, and so when suddenly everyone thinks this is the one and only thing for the future and everyone is excited. And then after all, when many people start to join in, we learn more about it and we also learn what does not work so well and what is more difficult. And that brings us into this so-called trough of disillusionment, where, I mean, people have called this also like the AI winter, or there have been different terms for that, where people start and it's not so fantastic maybe all over at all. There are some more interesting difficulties. And later, as time goes, we may see development into this so-called plateau of productivity, where we eventually understand the thing and we know what works and we do it right and we also optimize it. And I mean, every year you can find this graph on Gartner's webpage, and you will find these different technologies that they deem important enough to put on this hype cycle, and you can see where they are, and you can also get an indication by color here what Gartner thinks how long it will take until the adoption occurs. And that's quite interesting actually to look at. And we can be fooled by this annual report in thinking that this development is always like the same. And in fact, we see that there are some interesting differences. But let me just first put out a few selected technologies here. So from last year's hype cycle, we have, for example, 4D printing. Many of us do not know yet what this is. At the very beginning of the hype cycle, and it's totally unclear when this is gonna take off. Gartner thinks that's more than 10 years. You also find, for example, brain-computer interfaces here still on the rise towards the peak of inflated expectations. You find actually machine learning on the very top of the hype cycle, so something that maybe every one of us has experienced already. This is a hype at this moment, at least according to Gartner. And then we find two other related technologies that we sometimes refer to: augmented reality and virtual reality. Virtual reality seems to have passed the trough of disillusionment after all, and augmented reality is soon before it. So this is just from last year's hype cycle. You wonder, where is visualization on this hype cycle? Well, you don't find it. It's not put up there. What that part tells us about our field, that can leave to your own interpretations. So here we see that we can ask, are we at the beginning, are we somewhere at the hype stage, or are we already maturing here? Well, I would like to say that this, also here the answer is it depends. And I think one interesting way to look at this is that as soon as you go a little bit into detail, as soon as you differentiate subtopics, you see very different shapes of this curve. And here I've just worked out 15 technologies from the last, I think, 16 or 17 hype cycles. I don't think there are many more than that on Gartner's homepage. And I've regraphed them according to time. You can see, for example, that the quantum computing in the top left, it's on the hype cycle almost since its beginning, and it's still in the pioneering phase. What that tells us can be interpreted also. You see a similar situation for brain-computer interfaces, started to appear on the hype cycle like in 2010, still pioneering, but it has a much greater slope here. Then you see machine learning here, or the middle row on the left. And if you go to the very right of the middle row, you see augmented reality and virtual reality, and very interesting. And maybe this is also matching our own experiences. VR seemed to have had a very long time in the trough of resolution, and now it seems to be past that point and going to the plateau of productivity. And compared to that, if you look at 3D printing, this phase in the trough of resolution and was much shorter. And then of course we find technologies that are long matured by now, like voice over IP or the interestingly predictive analytics is in there as a technology and is described as matured by now. So this, I think, gives us the idea that also in visualization, as soon as we are bringing down one level of detail, we may find all these different stages. And this gives me at least a lot of motivation to seek out for new problems in visualization research. And I'm totally convinced that we have all opportunities here to do research on whatever stage you like. And if you are a pioneer, then you can do this also in visualization. And if you are an optimizer, you definitely can do this too. So this, in my opinion, is very motivating. I wanted to bring this forward here because a couple of years back, I had the impression that in our field, we were not so sure how well we are doing. Maybe we were satisfied with our results, but there was also some skepticism, and we had these very important papers about the 10 biggest problems in visualization research. That was an indication that we are discussing it. Now, I must say I have a much better impression. I think the field is really doing very well, and it's a fantastic place for research. If you, at the end of this conference, return inspired to do more important visualization research, then I think this would be great. So that is basically my main claim today that I wanted to make, that I think that we need a lot of more visualization research. We are by no means all done. And I think we also need new pioneering visualization research. It's not only about optimizing a matured field. We have a lot of interesting principal problems that we have not yet really started to understand well, and where we have only some early works to look at. And that is which brings me to my talk title here, From One to Many in Visualization, which is one selected topic in my eyes, where I think that we can do a lot of new, exciting, also principal research, where we can address very basic questions in visualization. And this is, at least in my eyes, this is really very, very attractive. So let's have a little look at this. First of all, I thought maybe some of you thought that this was a joke. I mean, from one to many visualization, is he going to tell us something new? I mean, isn't that the one and primary motivation for visualization since the first days? Or does he want to make a reference to the keynote at the beginning of the conference? I mean, there's many eyes also. Well, no, if you in fact read the abstract, then you know that I was talking about something. Let me come to that in a moment. Nobody reads abstracts, I guess. But this is old news, and I have to go over this quickly because everyone knows here, right? I mean, if you have a lot of data, then of course you want visualization to look at it. And Anscombe's quartet has been cited in this conference repeatedly as a wonderful argument why visualization is needed. You have these four synthetically constructed data sets that have the same statistics, and not just one, but the x mean, the x, the y mean, the standard deviation, the correlation coefficient. So there are, I think, 6 different statistics that are all the same for these 4 data sets. And as we are looking at visualizations of those, we see that they are by no means the same, and that visualization gives us something extra. Actually, if you want to have something newer for your visualization lecture, main motivation slide, then you can go to a new paper at CHI 2017, one actually honorable mention there, where they have brought up a new technique with which you can actually generate whatever visualization you like, giving some statistics. And I think you started with the Datasaurus dataset, and you can download from the web page 12 different CSV files that have all the same statistics, and if you want to have others, there's a technique that can give you whatever look you wish for the same statistics. So this is like a new version of Anscombe's quartet that proves that visualization is much more than just summary statistics, and that I hope was not a surprise for me. So in fact, today what I wanted to talk about is not so much going from one data item to many visualization, because that is what we are doing every day usually, but from one data set to many in visualization. And that is, in my opinion, a really interesting research approach. So we have worked for many years on techniques how to visualize medical volumetric data, for example. What a big important topic in our field. And I think we have some quite remarkable solutions by now. But we are now transitioning into a stage where we want to visualize not only one of those data sets, but many, hundreds or thousands. There are these very interesting cohort studies that are now becoming more and more common. Lots of individuals are started in parallel and over time, and we need techniques of how to visualize such data. Or in flow visualization. What a lovely field of research it is and was, and we have very often focused on visualizing one particular data set, often large, often time-dependent, very complex, very difficult to visualize. But now we are seeing an interesting trend towards so-called ensemble simulation, where we are not only calculating one flow data set, but many, maybe a grid of data sets, in fact. And we need techniques of how to visualize such a whole set of flows then. And we can continue this list down here, like many images. I really like the topic of astronomy a lot, and there's a huge challenge. And now we have fantastic acquisition both on ground and out in space, and they are delivering a huge load of images every day. And there is a need to study those images and to learn from them, maybe find dangerous meteors that may come close to Earth in the future. And this requires new visualization solutions. Or if we think about surveillance, where we have not only long videos, but also many of them. I think in the UK we can have more surveillance videos per day than anything else, for example. And how to learn from them without visualization is probably not possible. Or we can go to many networks, like in national security, where people want to understand, say, the social network of a whole lot of people in parallel. Or, very interestingly, we may want to study many topologies in parallel. And think about scale space analysis, where you are trying to understand the structure of a phenomenon, and you want to do this across a whole lot of different scales, and then on each scale you can extract your topological structures, and in the end you want to study them all together, how to do that. So I think here there are loads of interesting problems that we have just barely started to work with. Of course, we are not at day zero here, so this is something that has been understood before, and I'm not the only one and not the first one to do so. And people have already pioneered some very interesting works. And I have a couple of heroes out of my own eyes, but there are many more out there, and I cannot give all the references, and I hope those amongst us who are not cited here will excuse me for omitting that. But if we, for example, go to medical cohort study, data visualization, I think that the work of Bernhard Klein in Magdeburg and colleagues is really showing the way. It's very interesting and very thorough considerations of how to do these things. Here, a sample picture where over 200 spinal canals are shown from a cohort study that is ongoing in northeast Germany. And there are also other places, of course, where interesting work is done in that respect. We have some cohort studies in Bergen also, and I'm totally lucky to have the chance to work with the people who are conducting those studies. Or in ensemble simulation, where we try to really understand a whole lot of different flows. I think that Rüdiger Westermann in Munich with his EuroVis grant is showing the way here amongst others who are doing very interesting work, like in Salt Lake City or elsewhere. And we come to very interesting questions, like if you are extracting structures from flows, say this could be vertex core lines, it could be path lines or so, and you do this in many flows. How can we visualize a whole set of flows? Can we mimic a statistical visualization of such structures? What is the standard deviation of vertex core lines across a multitude of flows? These are, I think, really interesting principal questions, and we are seeing now some interesting papers that start to work on this in this direction. It is by no means just confined to what we sometimes call scientific visualization. Of course, excuse me. We find a lot of similar problems in other domains as well, where we want to, for example, visualize, say, a whole set of tree structures or network structures. I pick just one example here from Darmstadt, where Sebastian Brehm and colleagues, they worked on visualizing many trees in one visualization. They've actually done a whole lot more of this work, which not only is concerned with trees, but with all sorts of other studies too. So I think these are just three examples or example categories here where interesting pioneering work is ongoing. So when we now try to understand this problem of going from one to many data sets in visualization, I think it makes sense to also ask what type of this problem is how challenging really. And I think we can take it step by step. One step maybe is temporal sequences of data sets. And this is a big problem, but you have some properties that may help you. First of all, at least when looking back in time, we very often have a linear sequence time, which can be seen as 1D. Also, we may expect some temporal coherence over time. So these are aspects that may be helpful and that may make it more doable for us to come up with some solutions. Actually here, I've just put an image from the Information Bureau from Jerning and Charles Starscope that is already like 20 years old. Questions were asked already about what to do if your time sequences get really long. And this is a big problem. I mean, we can do long time sequences, yes, but what if your time sequences are hundreds and thousands of times as long, or millions of times as long? We have some interesting collaboration with biochemists who do molecular simulation, and they get extremely long time sequences, and it's a big question where to look at. You can never see it all, and if you want to study them one by one, you have to spend the rest of your lifetime on it. And this is, so there we need some interesting solutions. A second category here may be what people call parameter space analysis, or parameter space exploration. So when you have a structured reference space across which the data sets are organized. So this could be, say, in simulation, where you are varying one or two or several parameters of your simulation and thereby generate a grid of resulting data sets in a way. This, of course, can be very quickly very challenging, but we also have some help here. This notion of maybe continuous reference space helps. If it is not too high-dimensional, this can be easier than in the other case. Actually, there's a very nice survey paper by Michael Sedelmeier and colleagues where they try to understand this field as it has developed so far, and I can recommend you to read that overview paper if you're interested. I think that things can get really difficult and challenging if you are in a heterogeneous setting where you do not have, say, continuity or regular sampling as a reference, where you have an unstructured set of data sets, or where you have maybe a complex structure of data sets, a graph of data sets maybe. And if then you also have many, things can get very difficult very quickly. And this is maybe most challenging at the time. A few years back, together with Johannes Kehrer, we tried to make a survey about what we called at that time multifaceted scientific data visualization, where we tried to differentiate different of these challenges. And if you go to multivis.net, you find a visual overview of this survey, which at this moment has 166 papers. There's also one category on this. At that time we called it multi-run. You could now think of it as for example, ensemble So, how could we possibly get there to make visualization fit for many data sets? I termed this here, just for the fun of it, upscaling visualization. Interpret this as we want. I mean, this is a funny visualization. Some of us may have seen it, I'm sure all of you have seen it. This is an illustration of the entire universe. So in one plot. So here you see everything, we are done, right? I think this is a quite fascinating approach. I'm not quite sure that we really can see everything here, but it had at least the claim to visualize the entire universe in one plot. And it exploits some logarithmic scaling here and so on and so forth. So I think it's worthwhile to look at, but it's also worthwhile to move on. So in order to understand whether or not we can achieve something in visualization, I think it makes sense to ask ourselves, how far can we go? What are our limits maybe? And you know, in visualization we have the saying, and it's not just a visualization, a picture saying more than 1,000 words, and we are referring to our enormous bandwidth of the human visual system as the main argument why visualization is so good, and that most of our brains actually consume the visual input that we are receiving, and that we actually think visually in many respects, this so-called picture superiority effect, and that we can exploit visualization for experimentation and so on. You all know these arguments for visualization, right? But how much can you really do? What about 1,000,000 words or 1,000,000,000? Where are the limits? And I think that we can find limits at different levels, if you allow me that notion. So one is, of course, physiological. Eventually, it should arrive in our brain, in our eyes, in us as human beings, and we are not developing very much in that respect over the evolution, at least time scales are very long. And we can study where we are, and at this moment we are like at about 120 million receptors in our eyes, and we have a much fewer for color, and I mean this is also something that I assume that you know. And we can also study the temporal frequency, and we can see at about 10 to 20 hertz, depending on how we ask the question. This can go maybe out to 30, 40, 50, or even 90 in some studies, but it's not 1,000 hertz, so that is important to understand here. And we also know that our visual perception is enormously powerful, but it is complicated. It's not so Cartesian and extensible as we would like it. Interaction effects, they are limitations. If we consider pre-attentive processing, for example, a fantastic quality of our human vision, it very quickly diminishes as we are mixing effects, and that limits our abilities to see quickly. And if we are considering the Gestalt laws, we understand that seeing, for example, structure, say 3D structure, is a challenge for us. One reason is that we have two eyes very close to each other, staring more or less in the same direction. But after all, this is a challenge and a limitation. And there's more. So this is, in very short, what is the reference on our own side. And we can't easily go beyond that. I mean, even if we want to put, if we say, let's have 1 billion receptors in our eyes, this is not so easy to achieve. So then you can see what, if you go to the technology side, what kind of limitations do we find there? And I want to quickly run you through a few of these ideas here. One is in terms of size. So that's maybe the first thing to consider. And I would call this a technical challenge, which is hard and also something that many of us have worked on for a long time. So one limitation is hardware. I mean, not enough pixels, not enough memory, too slow computers. We all know that, and we are all working on improving on that. We see one example of an ultra-wide visualization board with 8 billion pixels. So this is one effort to try and hit the technology challenge and come up with more. How much is possible? How much makes sense? This is, I think, an important question to ask here. If you are producing 1,000 times more pixels than what you have receptors in your eyes, how much can you appreciate such a visualization? So I think these are important questions here. And of course, software comes with its own limitations that are important to address. Very often when we pioneer some new techniques, we are not optimizing them, and once we do that, we can gain sometimes several orders of magnitude in terms of improvement. Porting things to the GPU, parallelizing solutions that can make things much faster, and that is highly appreciated. Much more hard work is complexity optimization. In Bergen, on the same floor where we work on visualization, there's also a research group on complexity algorithms, and they are usually working on the whiteboard and trying to think up new algorithms that have lower algorithmic complexity for a particular problem. And they are very happy if they can go down from x to the power of 2.1 to x to the power of 2.05. And if you take a big x, this matters. So this is another important point for optimization. If we continue here, I think a very natural way for us to ask questions about optimizations in terms of number of items, and many of our papers, this is a topic that we address, right? And how can we unclutter visualization? How can we push more data items through it? I wanted to point out that this is already very interesting because it can easily lead to conceptual challenges. So if you have a favorite visualization technique that you have tried out on some small data sets, say parallel coordinates or graph visualization, and then you are trying to push 1 billion of data items through it, it's not only slow to compute, but it's also conceptually problematic. I mean, this is a very nice parallel coordinates plot of 15,000 data items, and 15,000 I don't call many. You see something? Of course not, because here we have this overplotting, and it's a conceptual problem. Some of you may say, oh, but we have some solutions. Yes, I'm coming to them in a moment, but the question is how far can we actually get? In graph visualization, here you see what is often referred to as the hairball visualization. If you are not doing something very smart, then every graph that is big enough will eventually look like a big hairball, and it may be beautiful if you put it in color, but it may not be very useful afterward. And then you have a conceptual challenge. What should you do? I mean, it's not only how to make this fast enough or how to bring this to the GPU. And then, of course, we have this problem of long time series. I like this visualization of the Earth's atmosphere on XKCD, and it's a temporal visualization, and here you see that, well, it's very long. And I mean, this is intentional in this case, because as far as I understood, it's maybe the main intention of this visualization to show us that what is happening now is really dramatic, because compared to the time scales of temperature changes in the past, what is happening now is really happening very quickly. So if you have followed all this visualization down to this point, you could eventually say, well, I mean, changes were slow, but now maybe things are speeding up, and that should be of concern to us. So what can we do if we want to push more data items through a visualization? Well, we have different types of techniques. We can work on the spatial resolution of our visualization and be more intelligent in terms of where to put our visualization. We can, for example, bundle graphs, famous example by Danny Golden, edge bundling, where we got a very interesting state-of-the-art report at this conference. We can also put more pixels in if we want to. So these are popular techniques, and we find in many of our different subdomains, we find solutions that try to more smartly use the spatial resolution of visualization. We can also try to do something on the color or intensity dimension, and you can, for example, use semi-transparency. Here you see that if we are taking an overplotted parallel coordinates visualization and we use semi-transparency, we can to a certain degree reduce the clutter problem and reveal some structures in these parallel coordinates. What I wanted to emphasize here is that this only works up to a certain limit. Here I have been going from 20,000 points down to 1,000 points, and I have used 1/8 of the transparency. So you can argue that maybe you can do 1 order of magnitude or 2 orders of magnitude with transparency, but you can certainly not do 10 orders of magnitude with semi-transparency. So it is a solution that brings you one step further, but it may not bring you to the end of your problem. We can do other things. We can, for example, transition from an item-based visualization technique to a frequency-based visualization techniques, and that, in theory, opens up many more orders of magnitude. So here we have a parallel coordinates visualization that we did based on a binning approach, where we are not drawing all the lines individually, but we are like you can think of a histogram type of approach here in parallel coordinates, and then at least theoretically there are no limits, and here you see like a data set with 1 million data points in the parallel coordinates plot, which at the time of publication, I think it's like 10 years ago, that I was very proud about this. So this is the one point that is so important for me here, that there is really more than just one and many. In a way, we are talking about scales, and we are talking about orders of magnitudes. And many solutions that we see in our field, they are great, but they only, in a way, thankfully we have them, but they only reach some orders of magnitude, 1 or 2 or few, but not many. So if we ask ourselves about like more pixels, more colors, yeah, well, maybe 1 billion pixels, maybe not more. If we go to this idea of transitioning to a frequency-based visualization, in principle we can do an unlimited number of items there, because we're not showing items anymore, we're just showing entities. But then I think it's important to ask the question, what makes sense? And in my understanding, in a way, we are meeting ANSCOMP again in every pixel. How many pieces of information would you like to put into one pixel color? And color is not particularly good in telling us about values after all. So if you have, say, 100 of data units per pixel, if you have tens of thousands or 1 million, after all, you learn very little about your data using this approach. So technically it's possible, but in principle we have to ask the question, does this make sense, and shouldn't we do more? Because in a way we are falling in the same trap as what we have seen in the example by Armstrong. And one work that we did a few years back in Bergen, which we called brushing moments, was that we tried to bring up this information into an interactive visualization environment. So here we first and foremost, we considered more than just one statistic per pixel, if you want that. This is, I think, the first thing to consider. Very often we are putting an average or a maximum, but there are, of course, many possible meaningful statistics that can help us to understand what is happening in a pixel. And we did that also for different, what is called robust variants, in order to be less sensitive to outliers and so on and so forth. So we here in this study we looked at 12 statistics, so then you can bring them up, you can make them interactive, you can let the user study that, find interesting statistics, and then go back into your visualization and look at them and see, so where do we, for example, have outliers in every pixel, or where do we have certain trends like a multimodal distribution or the like. So I think this is a very interesting opportunity, and we should be consequent in our approaches and follow the same guidelines that we have used when talking about Anscombe sport, that also in this respect. So let me just move on a little quickly here, since time is running short. There are, of course, more challenges. A difficult one is that you have multiple properties per data item, multivariate data or similar structures of the data. And I don't want to go into a lot of detail, but we have, for example, EuroVis visualization techniques that offer us some solution. Usually we can show, say, a couple of properties per data item in EuroVis. Then we have to ask how many of those can we really appreciate. Or we can do it coordinated multiple views. Here we have the very nice improvised system by Chris, who is also here with us, showing us for many years how to do smart visualization of multi-aspect data in that respect. I didn't want to go into detail here. There is a lot of work, and the question is how many channels can we really manage here in visualization, and what makes sense there. If you have only a few attributes, then you can follow the effectiveness principle in visualization, and that gives you good advice. But if you have many, that's a real challenge. Last, of course, I have to also comment on dimensionality, which I think is another interesting upscaling challenge here. And there we are talking about embedding challenges, basically how to do 2D or 3D visualization of any data. All of you know about this in a certain degree. We have used different types of visual embeddings, non-Cartesian visualizations like parallel coordinates or others. There's a nice state-of-the-art report from 2013. Helwig and I spoke about this if you're interested. So this is one very typical line of research and visualization, but we also can now learn from machine learning, who are teaching us advanced methods for low-dimensional embeddings. Could be projections, could be distance-preserving methods like DSME or others, and there's lots to do. One work I like very much is this reducing snapshots of points from Elsen and colleagues that was published 2 years ago. Here we can also ask the question, how many dimensions can we manage well? And I think this is something that is very, very interesting. In visualization, at least when I started with that topic, I was taking it too easy. I thought that we have either low-dimensional visualization problem or high-dimensional visualization problems. But soon I understood that there's a huge difference between a few dimensions and many dimensions. So if you have, say, 8-dimensional, 12-dimensional, 16-dimensional data, this is difficult to imagine as a Cartesian space, and we struggle with that, but we have relatively good means with the help of non-Cartesian visualizations, embeddings, and so on to still cope with that. If you have hundreds of dimensions, the situation changes completely, and you have to think differently to come up with solutions. One work that I thought was interesting that we did a few years back in Bern was called Brushing Dimensions, where we thought about, can we take the dimensions of the data set and make them first order objects of the visualization themselves. And we came up with what we call the dual analysis framework, where we have both the visualization of the items on the one side and the visualization of the dimensions of the other side. And we have managed to link them up in an interactive visual analytics framework that allowed us to work on both sides, and this has been adopted by now also in other solutions. So this gave us an opportunity to look at many dimensions. If you have a visualization of them, you can maybe cope with hundreds of them in a better way. So, coming close to a conclusion here, I think that we have very interesting problems ahead of us, and we have to think very hard about basic visualization questions. I mean, very often for me it is a question about abstraction or aggregation and how much of it can be done in a meaningful way. I sometimes think about this log-log plot as a motivation in this respect. I think this was a keystone in understanding bigger structures when it was introduced a long time ago. And still we are using this principle of logarithmic mapping when we want to integrate multiple scales. And I sometimes think, can take this principle into visualization research and apply it in other ways. So this is one motivation that I have, and I think we need to talk about multi-scale visualization, and we have to have some new ideas. We also can think about hybrid approaches. I think it makes total sense to integrate computational data analysis with interactive visual data analysis, and in visual analytics this has been pursued for a while. And some ideas are that, like Daniel he taught us that if you have too much to study, then you have to analyze first and bring your problem, your data, into a size domain where you can actually use visualization or visual analytics. I think this analyzing first is one approach, and another one is to iterate, and to go back and forth and to interleave interactive and computational analysis. I think it will be interesting to come back to this idea of hierarchical techniques, like visualizations of visualization. A very old technique, almost 90 years old, as far as I remember correctly, is the one of design galleries, which brings up many visualizations in a joint space and allows the user to interactively drill in and study some in more detail. I think that we can think about this idea of visualizing at different levels of a scale hierarchy in more detail. Maybe we can do something like visualization by example. If you cannot show it all, then you are using a reference example to maybe explore a mapping that is appropriate, and then you use it on the remainder of your data. And then I also think that task-based abstraction is something that we need to think more about. Once we know more about what we need to learn about the data, we can steer the abstraction towards that goal that has often proven to be very interesting. So all in all, I really think that this is very exciting, and I at least am very motivated to work on some of these questions. A small question is also, are we ready for new pioneering work in visualization? And I thought I need to make one note here, and that is that mixing different types of research, like pioneering research and optimization, basic research and applied research in a common shared format like this conference, doesn't always work so easily together. If you are evaluating a paper that is intended to address a new problem with a new idea out of the eyes of an optimizer, you may not appreciate the contribution, and vice versa. So I think that here I would like to call out to our community to be a little more open-minded and to welcome attempts to new directions in visualization research, even if there is no user study. So to conclude that at this moment, I think that there are many interesting questions about going from one to many in visualization. One thought that is important for me is to understand that this is not a one-step thing from one to many. It is a multi-step thing, and each step can be very hard to solve, and it's often not the same approach that will bring you from many to very many that brought you from one to many. For example, when we talk about really long time series, or when we want to visualize really many data items where we need to think more about meaningful applications, or when we talk about multidimensional versus high-dimensional. So I think this is one message from my side, which I think is worthwhile to consider. I also think we need new visual abstractions. Isn't that one of the fantastic strengths of our field, that we can produce images that are not photorealistic, that produce a new way of looking at things that reality can't give us? And I see in particular in the form of abstractions a chance for that. We can do flattening of 3D data structures in order to win one order of magnitude, one dimension, and compose a new abstraction out of that. And I think this can lead to very interesting new plots, where you have, say, on one axis you have the volumetric data, and on the other axis you have the parameter of your parameter space. How would that look like? And I think Lilith needs careful construction of such abstractions, such that they make sense. I think a really interesting question is when it comes to comparative visualization, a topic that is found in many papers, but very often we can't get much further than a few. If you have a few, you can do juxtaposition, you can do superposition, and you can do all the nice things that we know about comparative visualization. But what if you want to compare hundreds of data items that come with their own specialization? And then I think one last point here that I wanted to make is there is this idea of automation in visualization. And not always we thought that this is such a great thing. Automatic transfer function specification, automatic viewpoint selection, automatic, I don't know what, layout computation. We very often thought that as long as we are working with one data item, we can, as a user, we can do better. And that's probably very right. But I think when we go many, then we will appreciate automation much more. If you want to look at thousands of data sets at the same time, you're totally happy to have an automatic viewpoint selection mechanism. Maybe someone that allows you to go into it if you really have to and change it, but as long as you can start with it, this will be very, very helpful. So I think that a better integration of automation techniques, also for example optimization techniques, is something that will be very helpful when visualizing many data sets. So to conclude, I think this is a really great challenge for future research and visualization, and if at least a few of you are inspired to work on that, I would be more than happy. Thank you so much.
Very well from Leeds. That was just wonderful. I've been writing and taking pictures of your slides. I love it. It's so inspirational. I want to know if I can add one thing that I think you missed. Probably it's in your head and thinking about it for so much time, but that is the idea of the workflow. So I think in practice, a lot of the application challenges that we address are, if we tackle them head on, are impossible. And you could say that the essence of your talk is trying to get us to think about ways to tackle those challenges in slightly different ways to make them more possible. And I think one of the things is the workflow. So many problems appear to be impossibly complex at the outset, but as we think about angles to tackle them from, sometimes we find a bit of weakness, like when we're assaulting a castle in times of old. So what your thoughts would be about, well, if you put another slide up about research to do on workflow, what would that contain?
I don't have a slide for that. I think it's one other interesting dimension to look into. I mean, I only came up with the few that I presented, but there are more, and this is one very interesting one. And so what I think myself is that as soon as we are trying to cope with big problems that are not solved in a one-step solution, where you have to do more, then you have to try to understand which solution goes into which place of your more complicated approach. And then it becomes a study of where's the weakest link in your chain. And there you should probably work on first and see that you can improve. This wouldn't be just an ad hoc attempt to say something, but I'm not prepared for your questions. So.
Okay, more questions? Yeah, Thorsten?
Thanks, Helwig, for a very inspiring talk. I should ask the question, what a silence, but I won't. I really liked your beginning of the setup, especially the 80-20 Pareto principle. And I was wondering whether you can tie that back here. And what's going on in my mind here is you nicely spell out a lot of different challenges, scalability challenges. Do you have some idea of where they are on the 80-20 front, in the sense that, for example, you nicely pointed out that 9 billion pixels that's perhaps, you know, somewhere on the 95–96% thing, perhaps. It's nice to have, but maybe not essential. In terms of other aspects, though, where are we? Like I can imagine, for instance, in ensembles, maybe we're in the 30–40 thing. Or where are we? Can you tie these concepts together?
That is a very good question, Thorsten, and if I had more time, I would have put some little hype cycles in the top right of my slides. That was an idea I had, but I ran out of time preparing for my slides. So I think it's of course it's a question of interpretation, and it's difficult to make it very accurate. But you can probably estimate roughly are we before the hype, after the hype, are we having passed the trough of disillusionment? So I think that for some of the challenges, for example, the more pixels, more colors, I think we are way to the right in the hype cycle, and we are talking about new abstractions for many data sets. I think we are way to the left and much before the hype. I'm surprised that we are not seeing more papers that are again suggesting new abstractions in visualization. Some 20 years back we had all these papers with this is a new way of showing a tree, this is a new way of showing a graph. We had all these techniques coming up in short time, and it was great fun. And I think very bright so, this has gone a little down and became more mature. Now we have a lot of these techniques, but as we are going to more data sets, I think we are back at the beginning. Now we have to think again, and can we make mixed diagrams where we are basically abstracting an entire data set to one dimension of our visualization, take the other one for, say, the parameter space or for some other aspects of our data. So there I think we are thrown back to the beginning of the life cycle. If I had more time, I would have tried to do this also for the other aspects, but yeah, couldn't do it.
Okay, we are a bit behind time, but I think we have time for maybe one or two more questions. So maybe I may ask a question. Yeah, so in your conclusion slide, you had these great strategies, as Thorsten also pointed out. And in fact, during your talk, you brought some examples from your own group, and they were, in my view, all having interaction as a central part in that. It's not now near one of the challenges, so would you say interactions are already sufficient, or do we need to invest more in that respect with many data sets?
So, I mean, that's a good point, and there are several answers. One is, maybe I'm an interaction guy, I really like interactive and iterative systems. I think that this bringing the user into the loop and having like a back and forth iteration where you're working on your own cognition, on your own model, on your mental model of the data, while you are interacting with the data. I really have to be convinced that this is a very powerful approach in visualization, and so I simply like it. That's one thing. But I think there's another answer to that, and that is, if you're going many, if I may say so, in visualization, you really want to exploit all dimensions that you can get. And so one is, of course, you want to have as many pixels as possible, you want to have as many colors as possible, but you want to have as much time as possible, and you want to also use the users and the externalization that happens in the visualization in a way as an additional dimension, I call it like that. So sometimes when I'm talking about interactive visual analysis, I argue that through the interaction, you are winning an additional dimension in your visualization. You can explore like maybe one more dimension of your high-dimensional data sets than if you do not do interactive visualization.
I agree, but are we there yet? The interaction techniques we have are good enough? Or, I mean, brushing and linking has been around a long time, but it works great. Can we come up with something new which might be better?
Yeah, I think that, I mean, there's a very useful base set of interaction. I think this coordinated multiple views, linking and brushing, focus with context visualization, you find it in so many tools by now. I mean, I take this as a successful principle. I mean, even in commercial solutions, you have this now. And this is good, yeah, and it helps. Not in every case, but it's a good concept. But I don't see this as the end of the story. I think, for example, that we can interactively model interaction as an interesting idea, right? That you try. Sometimes when I talk about interactive visualization, I say that there are two principal ways of how to go more advanced. One is that you include interactive data generation. That in the process you allow to compute synthetic additional aspects of the data by, for example, using statistical methods, machine learning methods, whatever comes useful at your hand, and you add it to your data, you bring it back into your visualization, and that helps you. But I think another interesting idea would be, can we on the spot design new interactions as we need them? Right? You look at something and say, now I would like to have an interaction that works out the local regression of the data. And you don't have to assume that this is programmed in advance, but you can do this on the spot. This would be so lovely. Can somebody please do that?
That would be great, right? Yeah. Okay, so one last question, please, here.
Thank you, Helwig, for the great talk. I want to go back to the first part of your talk. There's another visualization community outside this room, and which has a view that visualization is possible for communication. And from the outside world, I think that's one reason why we are not regarding as hype cycling is that our visualization is seen as just a form of communication, and maybe that's one reason maybe it's not taken as seriously. You presented some great challenges which we can sort of address in this community, which is not just a communication problem, but a very big problem that requires sort of multidisciplinary thinking and scientific thinking. But how do we get over that barrier of communication as a community? What's your view on that?
Thank you, John. I mean, very good question, and really, in a way, a game changer to the talk. Here I focused mostly on visualization as a means to understand data, to analyze, to explore. I mean, most of what I've talked about was addressed at the expert, at the analyst who needs to understand a really complicated problem. And I have to admit that this is a favorite way of thinking about visualization for me as well. This other side of communication is very, very relevant and very, very interesting. And I see some very interesting developments, say, in storytelling for visualization, or I really like them. It's absolutely worthwhile to think about that. Challenges are much different. I mean, intuitiveness becomes much more important, and also that you have to understand how much you should try to communicate, what is your audience, and so there are very interesting questions in that respect. In our field, we have many papers that address experts, and there are only a few experts, but there is one limitation to how visible we are. And other parallel fields like information design, or they are much more visible because they are working on social media, they are addressing the general public, they are out in the newspapers, and therefore they are much more visible. And very often when I talk to people about visualization, they first refer to this type of visualization and say, that's what you're talking about. No, actually no, that's a whole other world that exists behind the curtain in a way. I don't really have a good answer. I think that I'm not really concerned, to be honest, because I think that by now people understand that visualization is a very useful technology. A couple of years back, we had to fight much harder. Now at this time, now people coming to me and they ask for visualization, also for other visualization for analysis. So this has changed. I have the impression that there's more understanding now that this is a very useful way of studying data and working with data. But we are not as visible as these more communication-oriented
Okay, so with this we come to the end, so let's thank you again for your talk.